Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Chiropractic Student Podcast. Today we are joined by Dr. Alison Bremner, all the way from, is it in the United States? Is it that you are at the moment?
I am Boulder,
Oh,
Colorado.
Boulder, Colorado. Colorado. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you on, and I'm really excited for you to share your message and your passion with the students and new grads with us today. So, could you give everyone maybe a little bit of a background about yourself, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be on here. I think we share a passion in helping young docs and students because it can be a little bit blindsiding when you come out of school. You're not really prepared. So I've been practicing about 15 years. I went to Life West Chiropractic in California. I'm born and raised in California. I thought I'd never leave California, but an opportunity came up to buy a practice, which is also an interesting way of kind of leapfrogging your success is, having some patients already there. I practice knee, chest, upper cervical. If your listeners don't know what that is, if you've ever seen some old school videos of BJ Palmer, it's that with new technology. So we only adjust top of the neck, and that's all I've ever done. And I was an associate for a little bit in California, my first 2 years out of school, which I highly recommend for anyone. Even if you think that you are like rock star and can open your own practice, you should still be an associate because you're going to learn a lot. And then I've been in Boulder, Colorado now for about 12 years, and I do like outdoor stuff. I go snowboarding on Wednesdays. Today I'm not going snowboarding, but a lot of times I go
Sounds
up there.
amazing.
Well, it's cool because you like have the whole mountain to yourself. I'm not sure if you've ever been out, skiing on the weekends. Man, the traffic's terrible. So
I've never
it's a
been
little.
skiing, but now
You've
I have
never
a
been?
link, so I'm going to come to Boulder, Colorado to come and ski with you on a
Heck
Wednesday.
yeah. I love people that come and visit, and I've had a lot. My girlfriend has never. She grew up in Florida,
Yeah.
and so she never skied, and she's learning. And learning as an adult, poof, it's you gotta fall. It's like practice. You like fall down, hit your face, and you gotta get up.
So what brought you into chiropractic in the first place?
I played college basketball, and
Hmm.
growing up, my first experience was like an ankle adjustment. So very, very different than what I do. Um, but it led me into like, being an athlete. And I was listening to your Brett Jones podcast, and a lot of people have that experience where they're in tune with their body. They understand that like, hey, if I have my body working the way it should, I will do anything to try to make it perform at its very best. So that's sort of my introduction to chiropractic, which was like, I get hurt, they fix me, I feel great, and I can play. And so I thought I wanted to be a sports chiropractor. And I realized that athletes are terrible patients. They're like, I mean, I'm a terrible patient. It's like, oh, my
Yeah.
elbow hurts and then my knee hurts. And when I was in clinic, in my last year in chiropractic school, I had gone to undergrad at a university close to chiropractic school. So a lot of my patients were people I had played with. And I'm like, dude, listen about like your body, innate intelligence, and your nervous system. And they're like, my knee hurts. I'm
I
like,
don't care
oh,
about
okay.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, they don't really care. So I quickly found out that maybe I didn't want to be a sports chiropractor. Nothing wrong with that. I think that it's a wonderful thing for athletes. But I took an advanced knee chest class at school. We were actually fortunate to have. I'm not sure if you know who Sean Dill is, but he was a professor at school. He taught advanced knee chest, and they were talking about cases, really complex cases, MS, Parkinson's, migraines, vertigo, debilitating things. And I was like, man, that sounds really interesting and challenging. So then I decided to do that.
So was it the scientific aspect or the philosophical aspect that intrigued you, or a bit of both?
It's both. I think that the reason that I was drawn to knee chest is it really takes the philosophical side of chiropractic, which is we're just trying to, find subluxation, remove it. But on the scientific side of like, hey, we're using thermography to check brain function, biomechanical X-rays, so not static X-rays where you're just kind of like looking at static X-ray, but looking at motion of lateral flexion with occiput on, lateral massive C1, and it's like, hey, you're having a problem here biomechanically and neurologically that's impacting your brain, and talking about, proprioceptive input and, sympathetic dominance and all these things. Like, that's what's causing your neurological problems. But then still being in the philosophical world of like, we don't treat anything, we just get the body to function. So I think the two things together for me like really attracted me to knee chest.
It's interesting because I've never even touched upon upper cervical. I've had an upper cervical adjustment before, but I've not had any classes or seminars or anything like that that I've taken. What was, how did you get into that? What was the process? So you went to a advanced class at school. What what was tickling your taste buds before that, and what was the step-by-step process? Did you read something that was like, wow, or did you have a upper cervical adjustment that was like crazy, or just open-minded Alison at school just went along to a class?
Well, actually, if you have known me in school, I was not very open-minded. So it was I actually didn't like the philosophical kids at school in the beginning. And I think it was because it was not a very religious person and I found it to be that. Now I don't find it to be that at all. I found it to be more of a spiritual thing. But I think that like when I was first in school, we had philosophy one. Again, Sean Dill taught that, and it was the chiropractic textbook. And we had to memorize the 33 principles verbatim. That was our midterm. And our final was a normal complete cycle. And this is your very first class, your very first day. So
Normal
at the,
complete cycle.
yep. So I
Isn't
was
that
like
like
very,
60 something steps?
yeah, it was nuts. And I was just like, and like coming from a not knowing vitalistic chiropractic, and this is your very first day of school, your very first class. I remember like not liking Sean, and then later he became a mentor of mine, but it was just like he was so sure. And he was kind of like, if you don't want to learn this, I don't care. Like, I'm not trying to convince you. This is what chiropractic is. And so I think that like since that was like the very first thing that I learned, it was like set a seed in my head. And then as we went through school, and again, schools, as you know, they ebb and flow of philosophy, of technique, different things. So when I was going to school, upper cervical was very popular, and that's just because we had a lot of professors who did it. And then to your point, yes, I had an upper cervical adjustment, and knee chest is it's not a gentle adjustment, man. It's like getting a bat to the back of your head a little bit. So I'm not sure what sort of upper cervical adjustment you had. And no right way. It's just that's the first kind I had. And it was like, whoa, what the hell was that? And so a personal experience, and it's helped me perform better. I just turned 40 and I still play full contact tackle sports because I have the kind of care that I have now. When I was in my 20s, I hurt all the time. I was like in pain and I was getting all kinds of different chiropractic and therapies. And not to say that it didn't help, but getting my brain working the way it should has drastically helped me perform as an older athlete, as I like to call myself.
And you've now got your own podcast that you do to help people, the Cultivating Success podcast. I'll leave a link below because I've already listened to a couple of episodes and I really like it, especially the one that's telling us the mistakes that all new grads and graduates make. And why have you gone down that route of trying to help new grads and students?
Well, quite frankly, just talking to so many students that are losing their passion for chiropractic super early. Like I'm talking like a year or two out because it's so hard or so not what they thought it was going to be. And I think that docs have an obligation to provide associate positions and also like trying to get away from like, oh, you're only an associate if like you're an idiot. Like I just talked to this doc and it just like one of my friends and he was like, I was talking about my new associate and some of the troubles he was having. And I was like, okay, I'm trying to figure out like a solution because every person is different. So if you're going to be coaching and having associates, you have to understand that each personality is different. And he was like, well, if he was a go-getter, he would just have his own practice. And I'm like, that's nonsensical. Like, what are you talking about? Like, chiropractic is the only profession that you think that you can graduate and then go open a business. Like, I don't know what is in the UK, but in America, 1% or like 10 to like 5% of people are self-employed. And of those populations, most people have a franchise. It's not their own necessarily ideas or business. It's just like, hey, I run this and I use the systems that are in place. So if you really want to whittle it down to like people who are actually having their own systems and original business, I mean, that's got to be like 2%. So if that's the population and we can call chiropractors even twice as good as that, I mean, really 20% of the people probably have the capacity to own their own practice. and are have that mindset. Because like, man, if you're a business owner, you're an entrepreneur, you got to be kind of weird. Like I'm a weirdo and I like that side. And it's okay if you don't. You can be super successful and have freedom and autonomy in an associate. So like my associates, they have freedom to dress how they want. They can see the demographic they want. My associate Colby, who's about to move on to biopractice, and she's done with her contract. She wears like a beanie and sweats to the office, and her OVA is like $110. It's like people pay her a lot of money, and she's like in sweatpants. And I'm like, great, good, awesome. I'm glad that that worked for you. That might not work for my other associate. My other associate might have to be like in a tie and collared shirt because that's how, he might feel that he needs to be successful.
Yeah. So, in terms of that approach, then, so you're really advocating people go and get an associate position. How on earth am I going to find the right associate position for me? What do I do? Where do I go? Who do I talk to?
Well, I think the first thing, it does start a little early. When you're in school, you need to be shadowing offices because that's how you're going to establish relationships. And at the end of the day, the old saying is it's not what you know, it's who you know. Man, it's who you know because you will meet somebody that will, catapult you. And maybe it's not their office, right? So maybe like they don't have a position in their office, but they're going to know other docs that are also successful because people who are successful hang out with other successful people. And you're also going to need to know who you are. So one of the biggest mistakes that I see is that like people go to these, chiropractor students go to these seminars and they hear this like really cool thing on stage and they're like, that's what I want. And maybe it is, but a lot of times, students have no self like awareness. They don't know what actually makes them happy, what they really want. They'll just like come up with I want to see 100 patients a week. I don't know why that's like the like standard mark, but like, okay, well, you want to see that many people, like, do you want to charge like $5? Do you want to charge like $100? Do you want to like have time to go like skiing in the middle of the week? Do you want to work all the time? Do you want to take vacations? Like that's like no metric on what you actually want to do. So for me, like my commodity is experiences. So like if there was no money in the world, like you had to just exchange on something else that means a lot to me, it's experiences. So I like to play sports and I like to travel. That's that makes it for me, man. Like otherwise, if I was just practicing 6 days a week and not being able to do the things I want to do, like what's the point of that? So then finding a doc that has a vision, and you don't have to be the same kind of person. I personality test my associates, so I'm not sure if you're familiar with an Enneagram, and I'm an 8. Colby's an 8. 8s can either butt heads and not work together, or they can work very well together. She's sort of a carbon copy of me as far as mentally. Like if you saw us, you wouldn't think that we're similar at all. But mentally, we're like very similar. So she's done really well. My other associate, my newer associate, he's a 5, which is like a little more of a thinker. So like my approach with him is completely different. If I get on him and like start like yelling at him or whatever, he's just like not going to respond that way. But if I give him a list, like, hey, you need to get these things done, he'll get all of them done. And he gets all of his notes done on time. And so like just understanding that like he's going to be different. So knowing yourself, getting back to your question, like knowing yourself and understanding what makes you really happy. A great book is called The Happiness Advantage. And that's just, they did a study at Harvard. This guy, he like sort of on like a joke applied to Harvard. He never thought he'd get in, and he did get in. And his experience at Harvard was like he thought everything was amazing because his perspective was his family didn't come from money, didn't come from a lineage. And he found that all the other students were super unhappy and miserable because they, their grandfather, their great grandfather went to Harvard, and then, their father went to Harvard, and they were expected to go to Harvard, and they're expected to like be a lawyer, and they were absolutely miserable. But it was just about their perspective. They're having the exact same experience, right, at Harvard. But the guy who didn't expect to get in was like, everything was amazing. He had never been, to the East Coast before. And the other kids were like, well, I'm just expected to do this. And so they were super unhappy. So that book talks a little bit about what makes people truly happy.
On the topic of books, then, what is there any literature that you read whilst a student or a grad that really propelled you into understanding who you are, apart from that, and maybe some chiropractic reading as well?
Yeah, I think that the happiness manager is great. I would say that like the first step in like changing your mindset about money. So the Little Money Bible is great. Think and Grow Rich. They're very similar books. They're basically woo-woo out there, but a lot of attraction. But I just did a philosophy talk at Mile High. Not sure if you know Danny Knowles, but he does philosophy nights.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I compared Think and Grow Rich to our masterpiece, which is BJ's last book that he wrote, which is like a, looking back on sort of the profession. And if you look at the quotes, they're almost identical, slightly different languaging. But if I read a Napoleon Hill quote and I told you it was BJ, you'd probably believe me. And so what's crazy is it's really a lot of chiropractors apply philosophy to the health and to chiropractic, and they're rah about that, but then they don't apply it to like money. They think, oh, well, I'm just of service. I don't need to charge any money, which is absolutely ludicrous. That's an outside in approach. And so your wealth, your health, your happiness all comes from inside out. So any book that is going to talk about that, I think is super important, and understanding, what makes you happy. And at the end of the day, like how to attract money and wealth to you. And that could be in forms of people, it could be in forms of experience, or it could be actually money. So those are the books that started getting me to think about differently to life, rather than just you're going to grind through it.
That's great. I completely agree. Like knowing who you are, and you mentioned Brett earlier, and he's got the Know Who the Fuck You Are book as well. And I think that's great. And it is true. And he's a chiropractor and it's very spiritual. So it's along those lines as well. If you could if you could sum up like maybe the three biggest troubles you see in recent grads, what would they be?
Well, it's the biggest troubles I would say is, yeah, definitely not knowing yourself or attaching to someone else's like goal, right? And I think that that's really what it is they're like, oh, well, I heard this, I just want this. And you're like, why? And like, I don't know. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
Like, and kind of piggybacking on that, a lot of times they would rather look cool than like be successful. So they'd
What
rather open my own practice than
what
actually do something better.
sorry.
Yeah. No, go
What's
ahead. What are you saying?
what's the indication that you'll know that it's not because hey, that looks cool, but how will you know that that's it for me? What's the difference?
I think if you can't articulate why. So if you're just like, if someone's like, well, why do you want that? And you're just like, I don't know. That
Yeah, it
sounds
just looks
cool.
cool.
I know
Not
it's cool.
yeah,
But
okay.
if you're like, I want that because then that allows me this lifestyle, and then I can do this, and I can, whether it's like you want to make a big impact, you want to, be a leader in your community, whether you want a lot of time off, it doesn't matter. I think that's also the thing, is like understanding that whatever makes you happy, it doesn't matter. Like I get a lot of grief from other chiropractors when I tell them that like I don't really want to practice much longer. And they're like, ah, they get like all mad. And I'm like, well, I'm not saying I don't want to be in chiropractic. Like I want to get other associates and see them be successful. And actually, that's an exponential reach of helping people. If I have three associates seeing people, that's way more than I could ever see myself. And it also fixes a problem, which is that like, the burnout rate and the success rate for chiropractic is pretty low. And the reason why is it's like you can't do it yourself because it's really hard. You know,
It's true. Like,
um, hmm?
um, it's interesting. You mentioned that I had like an episode of Burnout last year where I was just putting all of my efforts into chiropractic. I was working the full 5 days, double shifts every day, so quite early and late finishes. And then I kind of took a step back, dropped actually two of those, so I only do 3 days a week now. And I shifted my mindset a little bit to that because I was like, why? We've been conditioned to work 5 days a week until we're 70 and retire. But if we don't have to, why would we, in a sense? And questioning that narrative and thinking outside the box a little bit. Like all my friends are working 9 till 5, Monday to Friday, and they're like, you don't work a Monday or a Wednesday. And I'm like, well, I do other stuff like my podcast on a Wednesday,
Right.
but there's other things, and they can't get their heads around it. And I think because I'm in a chiropractic bubble of that vitalistic spiritual vitality, that I'm like, well, I don't need to. I'm a free spirit. I can do what I want whenever I want. Lots of people don't understand that. And I think at school, chiropractic school, a lot of people still don't understand that. They think they're going to come out and have a 9 till 5, get drunk on the weekend, and then go back to work on a Monday. And I think chiropractic can really, like you say, there's lots of freedom if you want it in chiropractic. Um, yeah, that's really interesting. It only just clocked to me there, like that I was following that process that you've literally just laid out in front of me, and then it just like a light bulb moment went off. That was
Well, I
incredible.
think that, yeah, when you're, and that's the thing about vitalistic chiropractic. Like if you're thinking of the potential of the human body and then what that can be for your life, well, then you're going to have to apply it to other things, right? You're like, oh, well, then I just live differently. Money just comes to me and I just go on a vacation when I want to. Now, don't get me wrong, you can't just not ever work, but it should be in sprints. Like so man, this winter for me, I haven't worked as much probably in 7 or 8 years. But the reason why is that Colby's leaving, my associate, and my other associate's taking on her practice.
Mhm.
And we are, applying more marketing to get the office busier.
Mhm.
And then in April, my girlfriend and I are going to Mexico. This like 5-star all-inclusive resort. And it's just like, that's fun. And then we're just gonna hang out. And then people are gonna be like, well, it must be nice. And I'm like, yeah, dude, it was nice. Like, how was your winter when you were like with your
Yeah,
family and we were working on Christmas Day? Like,
yeah,
yeah, it's nice. So you have to understand that there are these times where I don't like, so don't grind, but you can hustle. Like there's a hustle involved, but it shouldn't be all the time. It should be like I'm hustling for the short period of time because I'm getting to whatever, goal you want to get to, and then you get to take a vacation and relax. But if you don't allow yourself to do that, man, I don't like what's even the point? Quite frankly, I don't really
yeah,
get
yeah.
it.
I completely agree.
But some other problems I see when kids come out is then there's the other side. Like I do advocate a lot for students, but like you got to humble yourself because if you think that you took a bunch of seminars and you're gonna be this rock star associate, like you don't know what you're doing. You just don't. I don't care. I don't care if
That's
you're the
all of
best
us deep
adjuster.
down. We all
If
think
you're
we're
the
the
best
top.
adjuster the best chiropractic student adjuster in the world, you still don't know what the hell you're doing.
Yeah,
Because quite frankly, adjusting is 10% of your job. And the patients, they don't really know the difference.
yeah,
Now, don't get me wrong. You should be the best adjuster you possibly can. You should always be working on your art. But at the end of the day, if you can't figure out how to interact with people and like what they need to hear, connect emotionally, learn how to sell yourself, I don't care how good you are, you won't get people in the door. You just won't. So humble yourself a bit. I had a student that compared himself to LeBron James, and I was just like, this position is no longer available for you.
yeah. Bigging himself up a little bit, or themselves.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with thinking you should be confident and that's awesome, but like understand that you are coming in this position to learn.
Yeah.
You should be open to learning. And then that way you can learn on someone else's dollar. Because when you're opening your own practice, you're gonna learn, but you are paying for it.
Yeah.
And you're probably gonna lose a crap ton of money. But if you make a mistake, like when my associates make a mistake, guess who pays for that?
Yeah.
Me. So which is fine, like there's a growth portion and I expect them to make mistakes, and hopefully when you make a mistake you learn, and typically when it's like an embarrassing mistake that you really learn, you'll do that ever again
Yeah.
you know
It's it's so true, and that's one thing I've learned from my associateship, and like a year and a half it's flown by. Like I can't believe how quickly that last year and a half of my life has gone in practice, and I've tried to be as much of a sponge as possible and just learn. And the more you know, the less you know, in a sense. Or there's like a great saying. It's like you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what you know. You know what you know. All that other stuff. But it's incredible. It's been a year and a half, and I thought I'd absorbed enough, and it really is humbling to hear so much from all the people that I talk to on the podcast, including yourself and my boss, and he's my mentor and coach as well. And that's one thing I think students need to know, that they are not 9 times out of 10, you're not going to be ready to open your own practice straight away. There is that one person out of 10 potentially who's ready, but I think a lot of people would value associateships a lot. And I was one of those who was so close to opening my own practice, and I'm so glad that I didn't, because that would have crashed and burned. I was so naive and young and just did not understand. I'm still young, and I'm still
Yeah.
quite naive, but I'm not quite there. So if you bumped into Alison on her first couple of weeks at Chiropractic University, if you could have 1 minute and say something to her, what would Alison today say to Alison in your first couple of weeks of university or chiropractic school?
Yeah, I think I would try to understand the value of relationships a little bit earlier. I like didn't talk to anyone for like the first year because I'm an only child. I just want to like get things done, and I don't sometimes come across as the friendliest person. And what I've realized in life is that you cannot be successful by yourself. And in fact, the more people, the more social um, connection you have. I mean, that's really what's worth a lot at the end of the day. And I've changed that over time, and I would say in the last like couple years, I'm like really trying to change that. And so I think that I was just like, hey, like connect with as many docs you can. Connect. You never know. A lot of the kids I went to school with, like now are high in chiropractic, and luckily, I did connect with them because I now reach out and we have good relationships and connections. But yeah, that's the thing I would probably tell myself.
Understand the value of relationships.
Yeah.
Are there any other little nuggets that you'd like to leave us with? I want to pick your brains just before we head off. Is there anything else you'd like to you finish up on? Or do you feel like it's all said and done?
It's never all said and done. I think it's a process, right? So like your money mindset is probably the most important. Your mindset in general, like do not ever consume media, just period. Don't ever watch the news, don't ever read anything because it doesn't matter, quite frankly. Like you should just be consuming what is going to help you and your community and your family be happy. So your mind is the most important thing and you've got to protect it.
That's true. And I think hopefully we both value that really well because you messaged me on Instagram. It took me like a week to reply. I don't really go on Instagram too much. And then again, it took you like a couple of days to reply. So we're obviously not using Instagram too much. So I appreciate that. Yeah. So 100% I agree. Thank you so much, Alison. It's been a pleasure for you to share your knowledge and experience and everything that you do to help the students and the new grads at the moment. I think it's really great to have people who have been in the industry for a while to have learned and have a practice and be able to share that with your associates and now people online around the world. I really do appreciate everything that you're doing for the practice, for the profession. It's great.
Yeah, and I really like hanging out with students, and they say wackadoodle things, and I'm always like, whoa, like it kind of takes me back, but it's fun at the same time because it keeps you having a little more, I would say, pulse on what's actually happening in the schools. So I'm very accessible. Like, you can find me on Facebook or shoot me an email, or I do check Instagram occasionally. You
Good.
will eventually see your message.
I'll pop all of the links below to just contact you if that's all right. And
That's
then also
cool.
to your
Yeah.
podcast as well. And yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Lois. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.